Of course, the wealthy aristocratical families didn't like the idea of an LVT or a land value tax because, well, it meant that they would have to pay money out, massive amounts of money, percentages of obviously of their of the value of their land, which they wouldn't really miss or lose because of the massive amounts of income they make from owning that land. So, as you can imagine, every time these ideas and these bills and these proposals were put forward in the last century and a bit before, it was reached classically with breached with opposition. I meant all the time, because the same few families owned everything, and they must have been sort of obviously scared shitless at that point to have some kind of tax that would have taken wealth from them. And so this has been the blueprint, hasn't it, right throughout history, this this idea of taking wealth, enclosing and fencing and redistribution of land, and when you look at it and you look at the families and the names that come up all the time, it's no different all over the place. One of the names that I've come across a few times while I've been looking at the history of art has been people like Henry Wentworth Monk, the Canadian Christian Zionist sort of pioneer of the pre-Raphaelite movement, one of the pioneers anyway. There were others besides, and these people came out of places like Oxford and Cambridge, or were connected to that elite circle, and he was pushing for, or he was in historical terms in history, he was said that he was one of the men behind the idea of giving the homeland back to the Jewish in Palestine, and he was also, according to some literature, praised for predicting the formation of the United Nations. Well, I don't know whether he really predicted that. I think he just knew the right people in the inner circles, So old Henry Wentworth Monk, he was one of the early Zionists of the historical period I'm talking about is the same time as the Enclosure movement, which is the 1840s, 1850s and 60s and so on. So yeah, it's interesting how not only has land been redistributed, but also our people are also redistributed and moved around and put on land, just like there was people throughout history like the Jews being put in Israel and so on and so on. People moved around and redistributed, and land being walled off and enclosed in the same way. So spiritually, or metaphysically is probably a better way of looking at it, all of this stuff is interconnected, because you can't have one without the other. You have this idea of a hacking or a hijacking as a blueprint within within other levels of reality, which then become physical manifestations in this world, as people losing land, losing homes, creating monetary systems that tie people in as debt slaves, and so on and so on. And in that way, we are born into slavery. We are very bravely born into a world which is already rigged and set up in such a way that every generation from now on, in this illusionary projection of time, is imprisoned. That's probably the best word to use to describe it. Yeah, imprisoned within a system which has been designed from the start in that way. So when I look back at all of these, all of these issues relating to enclosure and land value tax, and the idea that the land should be owned by the people, for the collective, for humanity. Land should be free. Within reason, it should be obviously that there should be certain things that are looked after and cared for, but when you look at that and you look at the land grabbing and the stealing and the slowly but sure drip of taking away our wealth and natural access to the land, then it doesn't surprise me anymore when I hear all the other stories about how other things have been taken from us as well. So yeah, the old Henry George and the Georgist movement, they tried, you know, 100 years ago to try and bring this attention politically, and I suppose it was an academic, peaceful movement in terms of trying to pass legislation in that way. Before that, peasants throughout history used to march on London with pitchforks, and as I said in the other diary, that doesn't work either. So, and as I've said before, there has to be another way of dealing with it, and as other writers and authors have said over the years, there has to be only probably one real effective way, which is non-compliance, peaceful non-compliance. And I think that's one of the ways that probably the only way that we're going to be able to deal with it. I mean, I might be wrong, there's plenty of other creative ways and avenues of dealing with it, but that is a very powerful one when humanity collectively comes together in that way. So yeah, it's very, very interesting subject, and there's a lot of evidence for it in various books. I mean, I've looked in the Bible, I've looked in other areas about how land has been used as a weapon against people, how land has been used as a promise, as in the Promised Land, and in Leviticus and all these other books, in Exodus and all these other areas. Land is tied to people. People are the land. We are connected, and if you remove land from people, as I've just said, you are creating a system of slavery and bondage to whatever is offered to replace that system. And what has been offered is a monetary society, no different to the Monopoly board, which incidentally, when it was originally created by, what was her name, Elizabeth Maggie, in the again in the turn of the 20th century, the whole idea of the community chess card, and the way in which well, it wasn't called the Monopoly game, what was it called? It was called the Landlord's Game when it first came out. The way in which that was, what it was based on, was the idea of bringing in LVT and showing it, but obviously it became something else, and what we have is a world which has become something else, which is this going around this structure in an endless way of just paying and paying taxes and all the rest of it, as everybody knows, you know. So yeah, I think that what we're going to be doing, and what we're going to have to do, is, in many ways, is to try and find a solution through how we respond creatively to our own power, our own inner power. And I've found that fascinating over the years, how the imagination and our creativity combined with people power can and will change the nature of reality that we live within. So yeah, as I said in the other video, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to? What will we do? What will people do in the next few years, in the next decade? Because it's important that we understand where this is going eventually, and as other authors have talked about, where we're going to end up. We're going to end up with a series of tightly administered laws and regulations and other things that bring about this world government, this authority that people like David has been exposing for 20 years, and other people as well. So, you know, all tied in with that, as always, is how land is redistributed. See Agenda 21 for that, if you like. Look at the way in which, I mean, look at what's happened in America in the last decade. Look at what's happening in other parts of the world. I mean, Agenda 21 is a subject in itself, which I'm going to go into now. But the redistribution of people and land, and the taking away of land, has always been a weapon that has been used against humanity. So anyway, it's been lovely to sit back in front of the camera again and talk to anybody that cares to listen. It's very nice, and thanks for listening anyway. And yeah, I'll keep doing the video diaries. Hopefully, I'll cover some other subjects, and yeah, and I look forward to doing that. So anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.